The Christmas Truce is one of the most fascinating subjects in all of history. It's a time when two enemies that hated each other came together in a beautiful demonstration of peace. It was a moment of humanity in the middle of a war that severely lacked any sense of right and wrong. And it's a timely thing to study this holiday season, so let's get into it. The Christmas Truce took place on the Western Front on Christmas Eve, 1914. To give a brief crash course on the status of the war in 1914, well, things were basically going bad. Like, very, very bad. It was the beginning of World War I, and many of the soldiers had been told that the conflict was going to be over by Christmas and that they could spend their holidays bundled up with their families. Well, that was of course not the case. So as summer gave way to autumn and the heat subsided and rain set in, vast trench networks began to spread across northern France and southern Belgium. Deep trenches were dug and razor-sharp barbed wire was laid down. Shells had started to carve the once green earth into a barren, pock-scarred moonscape of craters. No man's land was taking place. I mean, it also didn't really help that a ton of new killing machines had been invented, like tanks, mustard gas, and machine guns. I mean, this was really the first mechanized war, and this was the first war in which all of these weapons had been used against humans. To put it into perspective, the last major conflict before the Great War was the Napoleonic War. I mean, armies literally stood in lines and fired muskets at each other in that war, and compared to the Great War, it was basically like a playground. But not to get sidetracked, back to the truce. An idea for a ceasefire on Christmas had been introduced by Pope Benedict XV, but both sides just kind of rejected him. The weather that December was cold and wet. Many of the trenches were continually flooded, and soldiers were covered in mud and exposed to frostbite and trench foot that seemed impossible to get rid of. They were dreading having to spend Christmas away from their families, and then something incredible happened on December 24th, 1914. Let's set the scene. It was, by all accounts, a beautiful moonlit night, with frost on the ground and snow gently falling. Private Albert Moritzen of the 2nd Queen's Regiment would recall, "And then here was I, in a horrid clay trench, miles and miles from home, cold, wet, and covered in mud, without the slightest chance of leaving, except in a coffin." And that's when it began. At about 10 p.m., British soldiers could hear song drifting up from the trenches of the Germans. They were singing the German version of Silent Night. In the darkness, some of the British soldiers began to sing back. And then they heard a shout. The voice was coming from an enemy soldier, speaking in English with a strong German accent. He was saying, "Come over here." What happened next would, in years to come, stun the world and make history. Enemy soldiers began to climb nervously out of their trenches and meet in the barbed wire-filled no man's land that separated the armies. Normally, the British and Germans communicated across no man's land with streaking bullets, with only occasional gentlemanly allowances to collect the dead. But now, there were handshakes and words of kindness. The soldiers traded songs, tobacco, and wine, joining in a spontaneous holiday party in the cold winter night. Descriptions of the Christmas truce appear in numerous diaries and letters of the time. One British soldier, a rifleman named J. Redding, wrote a letter home to his wife describing his holiday experience in 1914. Quote, "My company happened to be in the firing line on Christmas Eve, and it was my turn to go into a ruined house and remain there until 6:30 on Christmas morning. During the early part of the night, the Germans started singing and shouting all in good English. They shouted out, 'Are you the Rifle Brigade? Have you a spare bottle? If so, we will come halfway and you come the other half.' Later on in the day, they came towards us," Redding described, "and our chaps went out to meet them. I shook hands with some of them, and they gave us cigarettes and cigars. We did not fire all night, and everything was so quiet it seemed like a dream." Another British soldier named John Ferguson recalled it this way: "Here we were, laughing and chatting to men whom only a few hours before we were trying to kill." Other diaries and letters describe the German soldiers using candlelight to light Christmas trees around their trenches. One German infantryman described how a British soldier set up a makeshift barber shop, charging Germans a few cigarettes for each haircut. Other accounts describe vivid scenes of men helping enemy soldiers collect the dead, of which there was plenty. One British fighter named Ernie Williams later described in an interview his recollection of a makeshift soccer game. He said, "The ball appeared from somewhere. I don't know where. They just made up some goals, and one fellow went in goal, and there was just a general kickabout. I should think there were about a couple hundred taking part." However, not everyone was pleased with the Christmas truce. In another account, a German soldier scolded his fellow soldiers during the Christmas truce, saying, "Such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left?" And that was 25-year-old Adolf Hitler. But other than that, it was a beautiful moment of peace in a terrible, horrific war. Today, a memorial stands in England's National Memorial Arboretum commemorating the Christmas Truce. It was dedicated by Prince William of England on the 100th anniversary in 2014. Also in that year, the English and German national soccer teams staged a friendly match in England in remembrance of the soldiers' impromptu soccer game. What stands out most today, however, are the memories of the soldiers themselves, preserved in their own penship. One rifleman of Britain's 3rd Rifle Brigade recounted how a German soldier said to him before the truce ended, "Today we have peace, tomorrow you fight for your country, and I fight for mine. Good luck, and God bless you." On the 26th of December, the war was on again, and there would be no further truce until the general armistice of November 1918. Many, perhaps close to the majority of the thousands of men who celebrated Christmas 1914 together, would not live to see the return of peace. But for those who did survive, the truce was something that would never be forgotten. Thank you so much for watching this episode of History Simplified. Please like and subscribe, and have a very Merry Christmas.